Okay, so everyone has had a chance now to watch the video on different strategies that you can use to improve your reading skills. So I want to follow up that discussion with some additional tools that you can put in your toolbox. So I know that you were taking notes as you watched the video, so I'd like for you to continue doing that as I walk you through a few additional strategies, and be sure that you're writing down strategies that you think you could really personalize in your own reading practice, and strategies that you find to be just particularly compelling for whatever reason. That will be good for discussion that we'll have later. So, in looking at different ways to improve your reading skills, here are some 5 that we'll start with. One is that you need to know the purpose of what you're reading. You will approach different types of texts differently. So, for example, you would read a math book different than you would read a novel, different than what you would read a writing practice test for HiSET. So, knowing your purpose is a good way to help get you in the right mindset, and also can help kind of get you in the space where you're able to better utilize the additional strategies that we're going to talk about. Now, when you look on this slide here, it says, if you know your reading purpose, perhaps by looking first at the questions you must answer after reading, you can choose the best reading method. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because when it comes to the HiSET test, then you will receive a lot of guidance, as even directly from the people at HiSET, as a test taking strategy being to do what they're suggesting here, to read through the questions that you have to answer first, and then go back and read the passage. And that kind of primes your brain for things to look for throughout the read. And that is a good strategy. Like I said, it is recommended. Something that I would encourage you to do, though, is to keep track of your time. So you want to make sure that you are managing your time wisely in doing that. You don't want to run out of time because you spent too much time reading through the questions before the passage. Another reading strategy that you can try to incorporate would be to get any sort of background information at all that you're able to. So anything that you can do to help kind of connect the information in the text to something that you have previously heard, learned, known, mastered in the way of knowledge is going to help strengthen that connection. And something that as you can see here on the slide, that they suggest is, in gathering background information, you may start to form an opinion about the material, which brings us to this third topic. So if you have already started to form some sort of an impression or an opinion about the material in gaining the background knowledge, then that might help you create some interest in an area where you might not typically be interested. So it's just the facts. Sometimes things are boring. You're not going to be completely and totally engaged and invested in every single thing that you read. And for the purposes of passing these 5 tests, then you likely will find yourself in a situation where you're possibly reading about something that you just don't find to be that interesting. So if that's the case, put this little tool in your toolbox. Just try to find something about it that you can create a little bit of interest within yourself. So, for example, I am not particularly interested in the solar system, outer space, galaxies, planets, all that. I don't really find that to be very compelling, and it's not something I'm easily engaged in. But I've had to study it in the past, and I've found myself in situations where I had to read passages about it and had to have a better understanding of it than what I really was interested in. And so something that I was able to kind of hone in on is the fact that really everything that we see and know to be true everything around us. We're on a planet, right? So really, we're just on this giant mass of burning gas and rock that's just flying through the atmosphere. So when I think of life in general, as I know it, as you know it, as we know it, in that construct, then that has kind of piqued my interest a little bit. So sometimes, even if you're not interested in the subject, if you go into it with the attitude of this is boring, I can't stay focused, then you're probably going to get bored and not be able to stay focused. If you go into it with the attitude of there's at least this little part about it that intrigues me, then you can really kind of maximize that to help you increase your comprehension and stay focused. So those are some strategies. Another strategy is to make sure that you use all of the information that's in the book. So if you're reading a textbook, or even your passages for some of the HiSET tests even will have pictures that have captions. They'll have graphs that have headings and labels. So whatever it is that you're reading, make sure that you're utilizing all of the information that the author has given you. So you'll have titles, subtitles, summaries, conclusions. Reading the summary, reading the conclusion, that is also a good way to help gain some background information about what it is that you're going to read. Any captions that go along with the pictures, any key terms, any key points, any objectives that are identified, all of those are good information that you want to review and access and start processing before you actually sit down and read the passage. So make sure that you are using all of the information that is given to you. So another topic that we've talked about here in class that I would like to reiterate is increase your vocabulary. So my suggestion is that increasing your vocabulary is best done as an active practice as opposed to a passive. Certainly, if you surround yourself with watch things that have a broader vocabulary than your own, then you will likely pick up some things here and there for sure. That's one strategy. Another strategy is to actively seek out words that you don't know the meaning of and to be very intentional in committing those to your vernacular. So anytime you're reading things, if you come across a word you don't know, figure it out. Go look it up. Make note of it. Then don't just stop there. Try to make connections between this word and words that you already know, be that via synonym or antonym. So, for example, if you come across the word plethora and you don't know what that means, so you go look it up and you discover that essentially plethora is just another word for what you would call a lot. So then you want to make a specific intention to replace the new word with the old word. So instead of maybe saying, well, I have a lot of options to do this weekend, then you might make yourself say, I have a plethora of options to do this weekend, of things to do this weekend. So also we have vocabulary practice on our Blackboard page. That's something that I recommend consistency with. So 10 to 15 minutes a day is going to serve you better than one day a week doing it for 40 minutes. Increasing your vocabulary will help improve your reading and your writing as well. So using context clues to help you. So becoming, well versed in how to use context clues to try to determine the meaning of a word that you don't know. And then if you have the opportunity to verify that by going and checking it out, then just that extra layer of solidification will help really kind of bring that word into your consciousness. So I know this, like, for example, if you're going in to take the HiSET official test, then you can't really stop at every word that you don't know and look up its meaning. That's why you want to make sure that you have a good understanding of how to use context clues before you go take the test. But while you're working in class, then when you come across a word that you don't know the meaning of, you can try to figure it out using context clues. And then in that situation, you do have the opportunity to go look it up and verify whether or not you were right or wrong. Another thing, there's kind of like a bonus tip that you could try to use whenever you're reading would be predicting. So whenever you're setting down, think of yourself setting down watching like a thriller or some really suspenseful movie, then you might be, what's that girl doing? Why did they have that conversation? Why did she say that? Why are they going there? Like you're kind of on the edge of your seat trying to figure out the mystery, right? And so trying to predict what's going to happen next as new literary elements are introduced into your reading are a great reading strategy too. Some other things that you can try, visualization. So especially if you're a visual learner, then this might be particularly helpful for you. So you just want to create mental images in your head about the text that you read or the words that you hear. And that can really help to make reading comprehension a little bit easier for you. And it helps you gain a more thorough understanding of the text if you are consciously using the words that you are reading and hearing to create mental images of them. Summarizing is another great reading strategy. So if you go to a movie and it's 2 hours long and you come home and somebody says, hey, what was that movie about? It's not going to take you 2 hours to explain to them what the movie was about, right? So you are going to give them the main points. You're going to give them some sort of a sequential detail of the things that are the most important, but you're not going to tell them every single thing. So that's kind of like summarizing. So intermittently, as you're reading, if you stop and just summarize what you've read so far and try to make connections between the different parts of the passage thus far, then move on from there. That's a good strategy. Speaking of making connections, so anytime that you can make connections between what you're reading and your own personal life, that relatability will only increase your comprehension. So you be looking for connections that you can make throughout the reading process. So maybe the passage that you're reading is about the setting is a small town. Well, you might, as they're describing the town and the stores and the people, you might think, man, this really reminds me of my town that I grew up in. So there you go. You're making a connection. You're inserting something that is relatable and connectable to you with something that is in the text that you're trying to comprehend. Another example that they give you here on the screen is, you might say, man, this story reminds me of a vacation that we took to my grandmother's farm. Anytime that you can make some connections between your own personal experience and what you're reading, then that's great strategy. And lastly, I wanted to talk about making inferences. This is something that you are called on to do quite a bit in the HiSET testing process. So sometimes people think of inferences as just guesses, and that's not true. An inference isn't just a random out of nowhere guess. You could potentially call it an educated guess, but that educated part is what's important. You're basing your conclusion on something. So you're going to read the passage and read between the lines. So sometimes the author doesn't just come right out and tell you every single thing, but they might drop little clues here and there, and it's up to you as the reader to pick up on those clues and to combine that with what you already know in order to arrive at an inference about what's happening. So this idea of inference is closely related to implication. So if you think of imply and infer, then think of the author or whoever is sending the message is the one that's doing the implying, and whoever is receiving that message or the reader is doing the inferring. So if we were going out to dinner, let's say we were sitting down eating dinner, and I just happened to pass a stack of napkins across the table to you. Don't say anything, but just look at you and pass these napkins to you. You pick up the napkins and wipe your face, right? So I implied to you that you might have something on your face. You used what you know about etiquette and observing the situation and combined that to arrive at this inference that you need to wipe your mouth or you need to wipe your face. So that's kind of how implying and inferring are related, but you as the reader are doing the inferring. You are picking up on what the author has said without actually saying it. So those are some strategies that hopefully you'll find helpful and useful, and hopefully you'll be able to incorporate them as you go on reading in different contexts. So it's like a muscle. The more that you do it, the better, the stronger it'll be. The more you exercise it, the stronger it'll be. So those are some tools for your toolbox. Something else I wanted to talk to you about in thinking of context is this idea about informational versus literary text. So on the HiSET exam, then you will have to read. For reading, you'll be given a mixture of informational versus literary texts. So at this time, the exam is made up of 60% informational and 40% literary texts. Well, because these are the passages that you're going to be asked to read and comprehend, I want to make sure that we have a good distinction between the difference between informational and literary texts. So I'm going to share my screen with you here, and we're going to go to our Blackboard page, and we're going to review a document that we have from our Unit 1 Introduction folder that really highlights the difference between literary versus informational texts. So with informational texts, the purpose is to inform. So it's more straightforward. It's not as romantic. It's different from fiction and other forms of nonfiction. It doesn't utilize characters. For example, newspapers, magazines, articles, editorials, speeches. These are all examples of informational texts. So you'll be given excerpts from potentially a magazine or from an article or from a memo or from a speech, and you'll have to answer questions about it, but you'll be reading that type of text 60% of the time. The other percent of the time you'll be reading informational texts. So, or excuse me, literary texts. So informational texts we just talked about, which makes up 60% of the reading test. Literary texts are different from informational texts in that they are more aesthetic. So it says here on the screen, its primary function as a text is usually aesthetic, but it may also contain political messages or beliefs. So aesthetic meaning that pleasing to the senses. So with a literary text, this is going to be more like just a novel that you would read for fun. But ultimately, there's still a purpose for its writing. There's still a theme. There's still a message that the author is trying to convey. So it might not come right out and state it like it would in an informational text, but that's when kind of those inference skills would come into play. So some examples of literary texts that you'll encounter, poetries, drama, tragedies, farce, melodrama, basically any piece of literature whose purpose is to try to entertain you versus inform you. They might still be trying to inform you, but they're doing so in a less deliberate or a less obvious way. So literary texts themselves, it's not just that informational texts are nonfiction and literary texts are fiction. That they don't break up in those categories quite that easily, because literary texts can include fiction and nonfiction. So some fictional examples of literary texts would probably be most easily accessible in thinking about just a book that you would pick up and read for fun, right? So like A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, Pride and Prejudice, To Kill a Mockingbird. Those are stories, those are books. So those are not true necessarily. They're not based specifically on something that is factual. Those are considered fiction literary texts. Nonfiction literary texts are more like biographies, diaries, memoirs, journals. So those stories are still based in fact, but they are presented in a way that could be entertaining and aesthetically pleasing to the reader. So that said, all of this material is on our Blackboard page in the Unit 1 Introduction folder. So what I would like for you to do is to go into the Unit 1 Introduction folder and access this material. So the things that we talked about here, you'll see them there. I can share my screen and show you where to find them. If you go to the course content page and then go to the reading folder and then go to Unit 1 Introduction, then you'll see this is the link to the Improving the Reading Strategies video that you watched at the beginning of class. Here is the link to the Improving Your Reading Skills slides that we also went through in class. And then the next item down is going to be the HiSET exam prep unit or chapter 21 that I would like for you to read. And then you will be answering some final reflection about this entire demonstration. So the very last item is going to be Unit 1 Introduction, Final Reflection. So you'll just think about all of the things that we talked about. The video that you watched that had the different reading strategies. The PowerPoints that we went through that offered you some additional reading strategies. The difference between literary and informational texts and how you might encounter those as you go throughout your HiSET journey. All of that in addition to reading chapter 21 of the HiSET exam prep book. So I want you to, you've done all of those except for read the chapter. So now you need to go read the chapter on your own. And of course, always let me know if you have any questions. After that, I want you to do just a little culminating activity to help kind of put it all together and give you an idea of how you can apply these things in your own reading practice. So that will consist of you just answering a few questions. One is, which one of the strategies for improving your reading skills stuck out to you the most and why? Which strategy do you think that you could realistically see yourself incorporating or practicing? And then, do you prefer to read literary or informational texts more and why? So I will put these questions in the group chat as well so that you have access to them. But I would just like for you to, after you've read the chapter, go back and review the material and then type up a reflection in the chat to me, responding to these prompts. Okay, I will put these instructions on the board and I will drop those prompts in the chat. Does anyone have any questions at this time?